I was smiling when I walked in, holding a small wrapped box and a card I'd written by hand. It was my daughter's retirement party. A big celebration. Laughter, champagne, a slideshow of her achievements. People clapped. Strangers hugged me. Someone called me the proud mama. And I was proud. Even if we didn't always see eye to eye, I thought we had love. But then I heard it. Just a passing comment, really. My son-in-law, laughing near the bar. Now that we've taken care of Mom, and something inside me went cold. I tried to brush it off. But soon, I noticed how everyone was watching me, like I was the one being honored. Or maybe, pitied. Then a man in a suit tapped my shoulder. Soft voice. Polite smile. Asked if I'd step outside for a moment. That's when I knew. I wasn't the guest of honor. I was the problem they'd come to bury. And the party? It wasn't a farewell for my daughter's career. It was a quiet goodbye to my freedom. I wasn't always the woman people could so easily dismiss. Once, I stood at the front of classrooms filled with restless teenagers and made them believe they were capable of anything. I was a high school principal for 27 years. I knew every face, every name, every story. I ran on schedules, respect, and strong coffee. And even after retirement, I never stopped being sharp. I read the newspaper front to back every morning. Crossword puzzles in pen. I managed my own finances, my home, my life. But after my husband passed, things got quieter. Too quiet. My days stretched longer, lonelier. I missed the sound of a key turning in the door. The weight of someone beside me at night. My daughter Janet started visiting more often. At first, I was grateful. She brought groceries, organized the garage. But slowly, she started taking over, little things at first. Reminders for appointments. Notes on the fridge. Just trying to help, she'd say. Janet was always practical. Efficient. Cold, if I'm honest. Even as a little girl, she preferred charts and checklists over bedtime stories. I loved her deeply, but we didn't always understand each other. She thought I was too rigid. I thought she was too distant. Still, I was proud of her. She'd built a strong career, raised 2 kids of her own. She had power, influence, control, everything I once had. And maybe that's what scared her. Watching me age. Seeing the cracks appear. She began to look at me not as a person, but as a problem to solve. Something messy to be managed. But I wasn't confused. I wasn't losing it. I saw what was happening. And I still had enough clarity to know that something was deeply wrong. It started with a locked drawer. I went to grab an old photo album from the study, something I hadn't touched in years, and realized the drawer wouldn't budge. That didn't make sense. I never locked it. I didn't even remember having a key. That drawer had always held small things, old letters, some personal papers, keepsakes from my husband. But now, it was off limits. The next day, I found a note in the kitchen written in Janet's handwriting. It listed reminders: take your vitamins, don't forget to eat lunch, call Dr. Hayes at 3 p.m. Sweet, right? Except I hadn't scheduled an appointment with Dr. Hayes. I didn't even know who that was. When I called the number, the receptionist confirmed an evaluation for cognitive testing. Cognitive testing? Nobody had asked me. Nobody had told me. Something shifted in my stomach that day. It wasn't just a drawer or a doctor's visit. It was the realization that pieces of my life were being quietly moved around without me knowing. I decided to look deeper. I started paying attention. Subtle things. My mail started arriving already opened. My bank app no longer let me sign in, it said I didn't have permission. My weekly medication was already sorted into pill boxes Janet had brought over. One evening, while she was cleaning up after dinner, I peeked inside her bag hanging on the coat rack. I wasn't proud of it. But what I found nearly knocked the breath out of me: a power of attorney form. My name. Her signature. No date. My hands were shaking. I put it back exactly how I found it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my husband's old armchair and stared into the dark. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't forgetful. I was being quietly erased. That's when I reached out to someone I trusted, Miriam, an old friend who'd worked as a social worker for years. I told her everything. She didn't tell me I was imagining it. She didn't look at me with pity. She just listened. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You need to start documenting everything." So I did. I wrote down every strange moment, every conversation. I started recording voice memos. I kept duplicates of documents and hid them in places no one would think to check: inside cereal boxes, taped to the underside of drawers, tucked behind books I knew no one would open. I was no longer just an aging mother. I was a witness in my own case. And slowly, the picture came into focus. This wasn't about care. It was about control. The more I paid attention, the more things stopped adding up. I called my pharmacy one morning to refill my prescription, something I'd done myself for years. But the woman on the other end paused, then said, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Prescott, but your daughter already requested a hold on that medication." A hold? Why would she do that? I felt the room tilt just slightly. That prescription wasn't optional. It kept my blood pressure steady. I hung up and stared at the phone for a long time. I had never given Janet the authority to manage my health. At least, I didn't think I had. Then there were the visits. People started showing up unannounced. First, it was a woman named Claire. She said she was checking in, part of a home safety assessment. She asked questions that felt harmless at first. Do you ever feel lonely? Do you cook for yourself? Do you ever forget what day it is? But then came the more invasive ones. Do you ever lose your way when walking? Have you ever left the stove on? Do you sometimes forget where you are? I answered truthfully. No, and absolutely not. But her expression didn't change. It was like she'd already filled out the form in her mind. 2 days later, another stranger came. A man this time. Polite. Smiling too much. He asked if I had any friends nearby, if I had a will in place, if I'd ever considered assisted living. The questions weren't for my benefit. They were building a case. And Janet? She brushed it all off. It's just protocol, she said. You're getting older, Mom. We need to be prepared. But I wasn't preparing. She was positioning. I tested her. I casually brought up moving out of the house and traveling for a while. Her face went pale. Then she laughed nervously and said, I don't think that's a good idea. Not with everything going on. What was going on? That night, I checked the file cabinet in the hall. Several papers were missing: my living will, my healthcare directive. Gone. I confronted her the next day. I tried to stay calm. I said, Janet, are you trying to take over my life? She didn't even flinch. Just shook her head with that same tone she used when she was 12 and thought she knew better. You're just tired, Mom. You've been confused lately. Don't worry, I've got everything under control. And that was the moment I knew. She didn't see me as her mother anymore. She saw me as a liability. And she was preparing to make me disappear, one form, one signature, one fake concern at a time. The day of Janet's retirement party was supposed to be a celebration. I'd picked out a nice dress. Got my hair done. Even bought her a leather-bound journal, something I thought she might use now that her days would be less hectic. I remember feeling proud. Nervous, but proud. Maybe this would be a turning point for us. Maybe she'd finally see me not as someone fading, but as someone still here. The ballroom was full of people I didn't know. Fancy food, soft music, people mingling in suits. Janet stood at the center of it all, glowing like a politician at a victory rally. When she saw me, she hugged me stiffly, like she was doing it for someone else's benefit. I should have known then. I sat at a table near the front, smiling, trying to follow the speeches. But it was something small that changed everything. A passing comment. My son-in-law, chatting with one of Janet's colleagues at the bar. She's taking care of everything. After this, Mom's all squared away. I froze. I turned my head, slowly, as if moving too fast might shatter the fragile reality I was clinging to. I couldn't hear every word, but the tone, the implication, it was wrong. Then a man in a blazer tapped my shoulder. Polite smile. Professional tone. Mrs. Prescott? Can I speak with you privately for a moment? He introduced himself as a representative from a care transition agency. He said they'd already begun coordinating next steps for my safe relocation. He used words like support, comfort, monitored living. My ears rang. I asked where Janet was. He said she'd be joining us shortly to finalize paperwork. I excused myself and fled to the restroom. My hands were trembling as I locked the stall door behind me. I fumbled with my phone and opened the voice memo app. I'd been recording on and off for weeks. I played the most recent file, not knowing what I'd captured. There it was. Janet's voice. She doesn't need to know the full plan yet. Just get her to the evaluation on Monday. Once she's admitted, we can establish full guardianship. I already have the doctor's support. And then laughter. A doctor's voice. You've done well. Most families wait too long. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear. I wanted to scream. But instead, I hit save. Sent it to Miriam. And to myself. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. This wasn't just betrayal. This was an ambush. And it had been dressed up in cake, applause, and polite conversation. 2 days after the party, they came for me. It wasn't dramatic, not the way you might picture it. No flashing lights. No sirens. Just a knock at the door, soft and measured. 2 people in professional clothes. One introduced herself as a wellness liaison, the other as a transport specialist. They used gentle voices, the kind you reserve for children or pets. Mrs. Prescott, we're here to take you to your scheduled assessment. I told them I didn't schedule anything. That I hadn't agreed to anything. But they held up a clipboard, showed me a form with my name on it and Janet's signature as guardian. Guardian. I tried calling Miriam. No answer. I called my neighbor, voicemail. I felt the walls closing in. I asked if I could grab my coat. When I turned the corner into the hallway, I stuffed the flash drive I kept hidden inside a hollowed-out book into my pocket. I didn't know where they were taking me, but I knew I needed proof. They escorted me to a car. Clean. Quiet. The doors locked automatically. The facility wasn't a prison. Not technically. The walls were pastel, the staff wore smiles, and there were puzzles laid out on the coffee tables. But everything was monitored. My phone was taken for security. I was told I'd get it back after the evaluation. The evaluation never came. Instead, I was asked the same questions again and again. What day is it? What year? Who's the president? Have you fallen recently? Do you get confused easily? I answered clearly. Repeated myself calmly. But they never wrote anything down. I asked for my rights. They said, your daughter has everything under control. That phrase haunted me. For 3 days, I sat in a shared room with an older woman who cried in her sleep and whispered names I didn't recognize. The food was bland, the lights stayed on all night, and every time I walked too far down the hallway, someone gently guided me back for safety. On the fourth day, I asked to speak with an ombudsman. The nurse said she'd make a note. On the fifth day, I was handed a paper to sign. A consent form for long-term residential care. I refused. That night, I cried for the first time. Not because I was scared, but because I'd never felt so utterly invisible. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. The next morning, during a group session, I quietly slipped a note into the pocket of a young assistant who looked unsure of his role there. It had Miriam's number and a single line, "Please call her. Tell her Eleanor is here." Against her will. I didn't know if he would. But later that night, a nurse came in and whispered, "You have a visitor." Downstairs. It was Miriam. She'd gotten the message. She had the audio file. She had already spoken to a lawyer. That moment was like breathing after nearly drowning. The fight wasn't over, but I wasn't alone anymore. And I had just become the worst nightmare of everyone who had tried to silence me. I had nothing left to lose, except the truth. And I was going to make sure it was heard. The legal battle took weeks, but I was ready. Miriam had rallied support like a woman on a mission. She found a lawyer experienced in elder rights. A sharp, unshakable woman named Carla, who looked at me not with pity, but with fire. The moment Carla heard the recording from the party, she sat up straighter in her chair and said, "This isn't care. This is coercion." That single sentence gave me more strength than sleep or food ever could. They filed an emergency injunction the next day. I was still technically under protective guardianship, so everything had to go through the courts. But for the first time since that party, the rules were shifting in my favor. Janet tried to spin her side of the story, of course. Claimed she was just doing what was best. That she'd seen me becoming increasingly paranoid. That I had forgotten to pay bills, lost track of conversations. But she wasn't prepared for how well I documented everything. Emails. Notes. Dates. Recordings. The flash drive I'd kept hidden like it was gold. In court, I was calm. I wore a navy blazer I hadn't put on in years. I stood up straight, answered every question with clarity. My voice didn't tremble once. The judge reviewed the evidence and said the words I'll never forget. I see no evidence of cognitive decline. I do, however, see clear evidence of manipulation. My guardianship was revoked on the spot. My rights restored. I went home that night in silence. I stood in my hallway for a long time, just listening to the stillness. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet. It felt like aftermath. Like something sacred had been cracked open, and part of me had bled out with it. I'd lost trust. I'd lost my daughter. Janet didn't apologize. Not in court. Not in private. She moved to another city shortly after. I hear bits and pieces from her kids now and then. There's a hole in my heart where my child used to be. But I learned something I never expected to at this stage in life. Sometimes, the people who claim to protect you are the ones you need protection from. And sometimes, being strong means standing up, even when your knees shake, even when your voice is the only one saying, "This isn't right." I now volunteer with an elder justice nonprofit. I speak to groups about legal literacy, medical autonomy, and how easy it is to lose your rights when no one's looking. I tell them what happened. I tell them how it started with kindness and ended in silence. And I tell them that silence is how they win. But stories? Stories are how we fight back. So if this has happened to someone you love, or might happen to you, don't wait for it to get worse. Don't give away your voice. Guard it. Use it. Because even at 72, you're not invisible. Not unless you let them make you. I never imagined I'd have to fight for the right to live my own life. Not at this age. Not with my own daughter leading the charge against me. But here I am, bruised, wiser, and still standing. People think losing your freedom happens in dramatic ways. That someone bursts through the door, rips it from your hands. But that's not how it goes. It happens slowly. Quietly. Paper by paper. Smile by smile. They tell you it's for your own good. They say you're confused. Tired. Delusional. And when you push back, they use that resistance as proof. I almost gave in. There were nights I sat in that sterile room and thought maybe they were right. Maybe I was too much trouble. Maybe life would be easier if I just let go. But deep down, I knew. I wasn't broken. I wasn't lost. I was being erased because I was inconvenient. And that truth was my weapon. Now, I live on my own terms. I still forget where I put my glasses. I still argue with the coffee machine. But I read. I write. I think. I live. And I speak. Because this wasn't just my story. It's happening to others. Quietly. In the homes next door. In the same smiles that greet you at dinner tables. In the same systems that claim to protect. So here's what I'll ask of you. If you have an aging parent, a grandparent, an elder neighbor, see them. Really see them. Talk with them, not around them. Don't assume silence means weakness. And if you're the one getting older, don't hand over your voice because someone calls it love. Love doesn't lock doors. Love doesn't silence. Love listens. If this story stirred something in you, share it. Talk about it. Let it be the reason someone somewhere pays attention a little sooner. Because freedom isn't just about youth or strength. It's about dignity. And dignity doesn't expire with age. Not mine. Not yours. Not ever.